different thoughts and activities which will help us have a better and more calm, complete life. Today we're going to be ending our series, and then we're going to be moving on to a new platform. We're going to be use the Patreon page, plus a couple other different platforms in order to create a really strong community of people. And today we're going to be talking about the value-based decision-making processes. And they're very helpful because when we can identify where our decision-making processes come from, then we're much more able to make adjustments should we need to. And of course, all of this goes back to this idea that becoming the observer in our own lives will give us more freedom to make better choices, to align ourselves with the decisions we make, to better understand the world around us, and so on and so forth. On the new platform, we're going to be offering a variety of different modes of knowledge, including Ayurveda, meditation, yoga, personal coaching will be available. We're going to learn how to work better the earth and, of course, the different cycles within our earth and how to align ourselves to those cycles of nature, so that we feel more comfortable in our own skin, so to speak. Communication techniques, of course, ethics, philosophy, and a lot more. So when we're up and ready, I hope you'll be joining us. I'm very excited about this because I think if we can find good communities in which to grow and nurture ourselves, our knowledge, the interaction with each other, having the difficult conversations, but yet not punching each other out, this is a really good idea ultimately. So I'm very excited I'm going to be able to bring this to people. So today we are moving on, as I said, about this idea about moral or value-based reasoning. And this is really different type of ethical reasoning, which gives us guidelines about how to act, how to function in our world. And we had a little bit of an introduction yesterday. We looked at the vice presidential debate. We looked at how each candidate really had a very different value set articulation. On the one hand, and they were both consequential, by the way, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But on the one hand, we saw the Pence part of the debate as being very I-centric. Everybody has their own responsibilities, can make their own decisions, and we don't necessarily need community or rules or regulations to help us out. We talked a little bit about how this speaks very much to the libertarian point of view, and the libertarian point of view is really about how we want to maximize our personal freedom. And so I've got a couple questions in the chat box. You are always welcome to offer your opinion or to make a note, and I promise to get to it as soon as possible. So on the Pence campaign, we really do have a very specific type of morality. And that is one of egoism, which is also related back to libertarianism. And again, as I've said before, egoism is not necessarily a bad thing. It is only kind of problematic once we really jump into short-term consequences. We want immediate gratification. And so then the I becomes a bit of a selfish nature. But in general, our egos are important. The I maker is important. It's what makes us get up in the morning, go about our tasks, do the things that we feel like we need to get done. So it's not a bad thing, but we often associate negativity with the ego. And we just need to remember that as long as we have a healthy ego in the sense of a nurturing, positive ego that's also kind of aware of what's going on in our environments, that, chances are it's going to be fine. Now, we compared this to, of course, more the we-oriented or utilitarianism kind of point of view that we saw from Senator Harris. And utilitarianism works to maximize the most amount of good for the most amount of people. So any decisions that we make should maximize the most amount of people. Well, today we're going to look at this a little bit more deep deeply. And we're also going to look at some comments that were left from some viewers about their worldview and see how their worldview kind of populates these ideas so that we have a little bit better understanding of how these sometimes abstract stuff actually has bearing on our real everyday life, our practical everyday life. All right, so with value reasoning, and when we're talking about ethics, we have three main but kind of broad categories. The first one is virtue ethics. The second category is consequential reasoning. That's reasoning based upon consequences or outcomes of decision making. And then there's non-consequential reasoning, also referred to as deontology, which is this idea that we function on duty rather than functioning on weighing out the consequences in general. So let's start with virtue ethics. I've talked about virtue ethics before, I think actually in the first week of the series of these broadcasts. Virtue ethics is really focused on our character, that we want to make decisions that are in line with our personal character and what we think is virtuous actions. And of course, this idea comes to us from the ancient Greeks. Again, everything, we can trace everything back there, right? Plato, Aristotle, but it also comes from Chinese philosophy, very specifically Confucianism. We see this virtue ethics at work, although the West and the East have some differences, but the differences aren't too wide, and so that we can offer a general overview. One of the things virtue ethics says is that we should find ourselves a virtuous person. Of course, we have to figure out what virtuous means, but the idea is that we find somebody that we really believe is a virtuous person, and then we start to copy their activities. We watch them, we see what they're doing, we start to figure out the whys of what they're doing, and we start to emulate what we are seeing from these virtuous people. Now, the idea is that even though in the beginning all we're doing is emulating, all we're doing is copying, that with practice, that process will lead us to a process of enlightenment of sorts, that we understand why certain actions are actually virtuous by copying them. Now, the great, very broad explanation, but with only 15 to 20 minutes, I don't have the time to get into it deeply, but this kind of gives you an idea. Virtue ethics is actually extremely helpful, but also very difficult once a society's idea of what constitutes virtue starts to slide into surface understanding of values. So if you have a society that, for example, worships famous people, worships egoism that is a bit selfish, worships those kind of ideals, advertising, so on and so forth, branding yourself, then the idea of virtuous changes. So we have to really define how we view virtue before we can find a virtuous person to emulate. And that's super important. And maybe you get it from your spiritual practices. Maybe you get it from your family, from your mom, your dad, or your community. But ultimately, you have to really land on this idea of who you think might be a virtuous person. Excuse me, I got a little cough in my throat. So the next category is the non-consequential reasoning, or deontology. Deon means duty, and it's taken from the Greeks. And it really is that we have a certain duty to act. So our decisions are based upon not possible consequences of our actions, but what we perceive to be the correct thing to do. For example, do not kill. Here is a ethic that we mostly all agree with, but depending upon where you're standing, sometimes do not kill has consequences. Somebody breaks into your home and they are threatening you in a physical way. You might defend yourself and accidentally kill that other person. And many people would say, hey, do not kill is bad, except in cases of, if you're protecting yourself in cases of war or capital punishment, and so on and so forth. So if you're really, truly a non-consequential duty type person, do not kill needs to be a constant. And we see this with philosophies such as Kantian ethics, which really is functioning on duty. And then, of course, we have the consequential area. So consequential reasoning is that I am basing my decision making on what consequences are going to come from that action itself. So we actually consider what the consequences are before we make the decision. And so we have philosophies, for example, utilitarianism, act and rule utilitarianism, and I'll explain the difference in a moment, and egoism. Now, we've talked a lot about egoism, so I'm not going to waste our time by going back there again. But utilitarianism is when we are trying to maximize the most amount of good for the most amount of people through our actions. Act utilitarianism basically says, hey, we reassess every single situation as new. Every single situation needs to be reassessed again, which means the decision-making process is a much longer process because we're not relying on a rule that will guide our efforts, but rather we are looking at each individual situation as if that situation is totally new, and then doing the analysis that is needed to figure out how our decision will impact the most amount of people. But there's also rule utilitarianism, and rule utilitarianism is usually how our government works, how our laws work. So example, the seatbelt law, right? People, when that was introduced, the seatbelt law was, oh gosh, hotly controversial actually, but it was a utilitarian decision in a way because you wanted to protect the most amount of people and bring about the most amount of happiness through the actions by asking people to wear a seatbelt. So we could make a rule on this because we knew from data that people who did not wear seatbelts, and if they got in a car accident, they were much more likely to die. So we assessed the situation. We said the way to protect the most amount of people and bring the most amount of happiness to those people is to make a general rule that everybody has to wear a seatbelt. So in this particular case, we're not looking at individual situations. We're looking at an overall situation that seems to repeat itself over and over again, and that allows us to say, hey, we can rule here. So those are the two consequential categories. They're the main ones. There are many different ethics and philosophies. So I'm just kind of giving us an overview of the big non-consequential reasoning. And so non-consequential reasoning encompasses things like religion and spiritual belief systems. So you think of things for you think about certain things. For example, your spiritual teaching, the 10 Commandments, any laws, that's going to be reasoning. Now, Kantian, and he defined a good meeting, minds of meeting between secular thoughts. How can we ask people morals and when they are necessarily part of a religious group, but rather they are part of a larger, just secular community, such as a nation, for example. So what's called the categories, if you will, that we should never duties or lie, for example, we should never kill. Rules are not movable rules. They're duties. They're absolutely duties in which to follow. And a lot of the rules and duties that we have are based on often a combination of Kantian ethics as well as utilitarian. Just lost all of my chat, so I'm not instantly so sorry about that. And there are reactions, non-consequential reactions we've talked about a lot podcasts, and that is when we just react. We don't think about what our actions are, if there may be consequences, and they're not necessarily on some kind of rule system that is ingrained in our values. We just act, we just function, we just go for it, right? Those are the type. Does any of this matter? It's really academic. Last comment I saw before my chat went down, but he said, "You think you're all intellectual." We all have our own opinions, but what I have found in life in general is that it really helps us understand how and why we make certain decisions in our life. Where are they rooted from? And these ideas that I'm presenting to you, they're not ideas, new ideas. They have been with us for the earliest time of human being. The hell we do is behind. And that's ultimately what we're trying to develop in ourselves as the observer, is to be able to understand why we behave the way we behave. And that gives us the freedom to then consider, do I want to behave like this again in a different kind of situation? So it really helps us understand ourselves. It helps us communicate with others as well, especially when we're talking to somebody who does not hold the same value system that we have. So one of the folks who, and oh my goodness, I think, I hope that this is still going. It looks like my internet has been having problems. We'll see what happens here. One of the things that one of the readers came back to was he talked about a friend of his that he's been a friend with for a very, very, very long time. And he said that his friend is mostly somebody who is intransient, and basically saying that this person cannot necessarily move or change their values as different circumstances present themselves. And it's an interesting phenomenon. I gotta see if we can get this going again. I'm not sure if we are going. I'm plugged in, but my Wi-Fi has gone out. So one of the things is that we have a difference in point of view. If we have a friend who functions on non-consequential ethical reasoning, that they don't think about the consequences, that they're only functioning on duty or a perceived sense of duty, then sometimes it's hard to find a good medium. Because for those folks, what we have is a situation in which their values never change with circumstance. Whereas if you're a consequential reasoning kind of person, your values are going to change with circumstance. It can't be helped ultimately. It's part of who you are. It's part of how you function. So sometimes those relationships can be rocky. Now, this viewer, Vaughn, said that they don't talk about certain topics. And they don't talk about certain topics mostly because they know that conflict is going to occur. So the idea then would be, how can we notice what our values are, how they function, and then also have a conversation on that? Because if you can establish a baseline ultimately about how we think and function together, then you're better able to communicate even about those difficult topics. Kat wrote that one of the things that bother her is that we are such an I-focused world. And she's talking about egoism, when egoism kind of goes into that place of selfishness, when we're looking to take care of our moments of gratification immediately, rather than thinking about how, okay, this may gratify me right now, but how is it going to impact me 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, a day from now, 2 years from now, and so on and so forth. She writes, we are the thinker-doers. We deserve it all at the expense of everyone else. And this, of course, is a reflection of when egoism tends to fall into that kind of pitfall of selfishness. And in a society in which immediate gratification is now a norm, we can find any piece of information we want at the drop of the hat. We can find a iPhone at the corner store. I can pick up a smartphone sometimes at my 7-Eleven, right? So when we have immediate gratification, sometimes then that starts to expand out through the rest of our world. And that can be a problem as well. So that's just an overview about how moral philosophy actually has some kind of basis in our everyday life. And the better you can see how your value system impacts how you relate to others, how you personally make decisions, and how those decisions either benefit you or detract from your life. Well, by identifying those things, you're going to give yourself a lot more freedom. So let's now go on to our meditation portion of this program. I've got the elf meditation going again. And I just want you to sit in your chair or on your bed and relax. Take a couple deep breaths. Breathe deep into your core and then exhale, letting go of anything that no longer serves you. And I just want you to focus on your breathing for a moment. Don't try to control it. Just be aware of the breath. All right. Now I want you to focus your breath on your heart center. It's in our heart that most of our values rest, exist in. And just imagine your heart is expanding with each breath. We're going to start with what's called the 4 soul questions. And I have these questions from the Chopra Center, their meditation and Ayurvedic programs. And these soul questions are designed to help ourselves know ourselves just a little bit better. As you silently repeat these questions to yourself, don't force the answer, don't judge it. Just allow anything that comes to come. Maybe nothing will come, and that's fine. It's a practice. And the more we practice, the more in tuned we're going to be as to how we think, how our emotions are impacted in this world, and how we go forward. Who am I? Who am I is not an action or an explanation. It's just who you are. Relax into being, into your moment of existence. and just take a moment to sit with yourself for a little while. Who am I? What do I want? What is my deepest desire? Allow any thought, image, or sensation to come to you, and just observe it, and then let it go. What do I want? Next, what is my purpose? How can I serve myself and others? What is my purpose? Allowing any thought, sensation, or image come to you. What is my purpose? And finally, what am I grateful for? What am I grateful for? Now, let go of any of the questions and the answers, and simply focus your attention back onto your breath. And as you are meditating, if you have any sounds, images, or thoughts that seem to come to you through the process, just allow it to happen. Recognize them and then send them on their way. Don't get involved. Just be the observer of your life, your thoughts, the feelings you experience emotionally and physically. Just observe them without getting involved. If you practice meditation twice a day for up to 30 minutes at a time, you'll get much better at being the observer in your own life. Being yourself, make great decisions for yourself as you move forward. I thank you, everyone who has sat with me through all of these video broadcastings. I hope you will join me as soon as we move over to our Patreon page. And I am grateful for all the participation that I have received in the Facebook group. And as I leave you today, I leave you with a few, hopefully happy intentions. I have an energetic and healthy body. I have an energetic and healthy body. I have a compassionate and joyful heart. I have a reflective and alert mind and lightness of being. Aloha, friends, and namaste. Until next time, aloha.